Okay, today is Thursday, September 26th. This is GDP 110, and we're talking about display performance in InDesign, and we're going to be talking about like texture assignment and different things today. So if you place an image in InDesign and it looks crappy, so let me see if I can get this to look crappy for you. So there's a fast display, sometimes that will show, or sometimes we have a typical display, and here you can see it looks really pixelated. But we know that this image is big enough to place and it shouldn't have any sort of problem. So all you have to do is make sure the image is selected, right click, and choose Display Performance High Quality Display. And that will automatically crisp it up for you. Okay. The other way to do it is in Preferences. So let's go to General. I think it's in here. We'll kind of have to play through, I can't quite remember. Interface. Type, advanced type, composition. Oh, here we go, display performance. So the default that is set for this computer is high quality. So that's why when I first placed it, it looked nice. So if you guys all go into your computers, set this preference, then you won't have to worry about it. There's something else I want to show you guys, and that is not autocorrect. Where is it? It's called dynamic spell check. And oh, here it is, spelling. So you want to enable dynamic spelling. And what this does is as you're working on your document, if you have a spelling error, it will do like what happens in Word. It will give you like a little squiggle and let you know that there's an issue. It's really helpful. You can also go to type and do, where is it? Edit, spelling, check spelling. And you can see the dynamic spelling has been checked here as well. And this will take you through the step of checking all the spelling, and you can do it in your, for the whole document, you can do it for a single page, etc. Another helpful tool. All right, have I showed you guys how to use preview in this class? I think maybe I showed you quickly, but this is something else that is helpful, but it would mask the ability to see dynamic spelling and any sort of spelling error. So let me show you what that means. So in here, I'm going to fill this with some placeholder text for now, just to show you all these words are misspelling because they're nothing. But you can see there's a little red squiggly line underneath each one. They're all not real words. So if I do the shortcut command for preview, which is to hit the W key on your keyboard, this shows you a clean preview of what your document will look like without margins and guidelines and bounding boxes. I toggle back and forth with this the entire time I'm working because I get distracted by all these lines and I want to see what it looks like free flowing without any of these margins in the way. Especially if I have a lot of stuff layered on top and have a lot of bounding boxes. It just cleans it up. But you can see when your preview is on, you lose the squiggly lines underneath your words. So always toggle back and forth and double check. That's my little tip of the day. Highly recommend it. Okay, other questions about InDesign or Illustrator? This is a good chance. Anderson.
Like transferring your swatches from two different InDesign documents.
Transferring your swatches from two different InDesign documents. Like you created some swatches and it's not transferring over. Is it on the same computer? So sometimes what happens is you create swatches in one document and they do not transfer over to the other. You have like a cache hidden in temporary files in your machine that will sometimes wipe those clean. So my recommendation is if you have a set amount of swatches that you really want to move over to the next document, you can do a couple of things. You can export your swatches and you can do save swatches, save it as a .ase file, and then reopen it again in another document. Or what I always do if I'm having issues with swatches disappearing is usually I'll take, this is in the way here, view, no, that's not what I want. So sometimes what I do in InDesign is I will actually do a double screen layout. So let me open a new document. Oops, open one that's already done. Okay, so we have two different documents, and you can see it. I have them open, and you can tell in this tab right here. What you can do is you can split your screen however many ways you want. So you automatically get this side-by-side working situation. This can sometimes get confusing, but the thing that's nice about it is if you want to drag stuff back and forth, it makes it a lot easier. So if I have something like a particular color or like a text box that has like a style that I like, I'll just take a text box and I'll use the Alt or Option command to duplicate, and I can just drag it right in. So that's one way to capture text and swatches that way for certain elements. And then let's see if this works. Sometimes you can drag, I don't think it's going to work for us. I'm going to say sometimes you can drag it over, but if you select something that has the color you want and drag it over to the next screen, then you kind of have this flexibility, and then you don't have to worry so much about exporting a swatches panel, re-uploading it, etc. But usually when you're creating swatches and you create them within a document, the document thinks you've created these swatches for this particular document, so there's no need to automatically add those to all your swatches for all time. There has to be a setting to if you wanted to do that. I don't know exactly what that is right now, but we could figure that out together. Okay, and this is something that I did for work. What you guys are going to be doing is an animated GIF. So this just shows the 3 different panels of an animation. Okay, so this is really helpful. You can also do more than one window, so you can see all these different orientations. Okay. Other questions? InDesign, Illustrator.
Illustrator, if you want to have one color, only one color, and just tint it,
How
do you like to do that? Because I was struggling with knowing if it was a tint or if it was like another color.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So let's go ahead and open a new document in Illustrator. We're going to talk about how you can make a tint in Illustrator without mixing in other colors. So let's look at our swatches here. Let's say that this little swatch group right here is the swatches that you've imported. You're going to use it for your digital painting. And red is one of your colors. And you want to have multiple versions of tints to go with this red to fill in for your monochromatic painting. So kind of like the little tool I always love to use is this one right here called Color Guide. And this is really helpful because it will literally show you shades and tints of whatever color is selected. So then if you select a tint here, what you can do is you can then take this and directly drag it into your swatches, and then you have it saved.
Yeah, that's what I did. But I was like wondering if it was another color.
You can also go to, well, it kind of depends. I mean, like, you could double check with your color panel. Let's see right here. And you could see how much of each color. So if you know your color is 20/20, you know, magenta and yellow exactly, then you could say, okay, anything that I'm adding more percentages of color to, if any of these change, then I know it's not correct. That's one way to do it. But this is generally what I like to do. The nice thing about the color guide too is that you can also show different color relationships by clicking this Harmony Rules drop down, and you can see all these different options. So you could automatically choose complementary, or you could do monochromatic, things like that.
Can you tint a color like by yourself, like putting in percentage? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see how we can do that. I'm trying to remember here. Okay. So here we have this one color, and you can see here you have the spectrum of whites and blacks. If you make sure that your black isn't actually adding at all and you keep these numbers the same, but the two numbers that make up this purple
Okay, so those will
Yeah.
change.
Yes. Mhm. Because you're going to dilute the percentage of how much of that color to make that, right? So it's not going to be as saturated. The hue is not going to be at full strength. More questions? What did you guys stumble with? Luke? Questions?
I don't know yet.
Okay. You don't know yet? Okay. That's totally fine. All right, so if you guys have questions that pop up tonight, just ask away. There's a lot of little things like this, tips and tricks, that you're either going to figure out on your own or you're just going to never know about. I try to explain as much as I can, but there's so much that these programs can do, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much. Okay. All right. So let's talk about texture. Okay. So texture, when in terms of in the general sense of texture, is like a tactile feeling, right? Or the illusion of a tactile feeling. When it comes to graphics, it's usually always an illusion or a representation of texture. You generally won't feel it because you're printing on a smooth surface, but you can utilize the paper or the substrate that you're printing on to help impact or add to the texture of your piece. So texture is a huge sensory stimulator, right? Everything that we touch every day evokes an emotion and a feeling. You have a soft blanket that you grew up with, you're always going to remember that soft feeling. The silky touch of someone's hair, or like the stickiness of like a sweet or a candy. Those kind of things evoke emotions and feelings and really help give us the sense of an experience. So when it comes to design, you can also utilize this representation of texture to also create these experiences. Texture, so you have the three different things I just talked about. Visual texture, which is this illusion or impression or representation of texture. Then you have tactile texture, the feeling, the actual touch. And then you have paper. Whatever your substrate is that you're printing on can also add to the texture. That's all pattern stuff. Okay, so finding texture versus creating it, and how you can utilize texture in your pieces. This is another design element that adds a lot of visual interest to a piece. It can really draw someone in. It can be that extra oomph that takes your piece from really flat looking to have a rich feeling to it, okay? So textures can be found in the environment. You can find texture in photographs. You can find texture in like the watercolors that like Tad was showing us. You know, you kind of had like this feeling with like you could feel like this wet paint on paper relationship. So you can find textures anywhere, and then you can capture them, essentially. You could do things like taking a picture. You can create your own texture by painting on like a textured paper or using thick globs of paint. You can do rubbings where you take a crayon and you put paper over, say, a rough surface, and you lightly color over it, and it will capture that feeling of texture. And like we said before, the type of paper you use can take and complement, or it can actually go against whatever texture you're trying to create. The character, quality, and amount used should be connected to the message that is being communicated with the design. So texture is one of those things that, just like all the design elements and principles we're talking about, there has to be a meaning for why you're using it. And in the beginning, you guys are trying to figure out which visuals kind of actually work with the messages that you're doing. But you'll start to get into this rhythm where you'll know if you're trying to create a piece that is very sleek and smooth, if you did a texture that looks like some sort of hair or wood, it wouldn't really be the look that you're trying to create, right? So these are different examples of textures that are quite subtle, but they're all created using watercolor on paper, and they all kind of give a different illusion of something. You know, you have something here that looks almost like wood grain or stone. Maybe this is like a rough rock where you have variations in the depth a little bit on top of the surface. This kind of looks like a fur of some sort. That was all created using hand done, you know, brush on paper. something that I do and that you'll probably start to do after you take this class is collect texture. You'll find images that are high resolution, or you'll create them and scan them and have these photographs and stuff that you find from the web that are royalty free, high res, and you'll just start saving them in a folder called texture. And what that does is it gives you this library of really cool things to pull from, and you can manipulate them as many ways as you want. But sometimes you need something that's going to emulate the feeling of rock, but you don't want an actual picture of rock, or you want it to be very delicate, whatever it is. Or you want to have the illusion that a piece you did is kind of antiqued or retro, so you want to throw like a little bit of a texture over like this vintage photograph piece that you're doing. So that's where texture comes in really handy. So something else that we talked about when we were talking about line is pattern. And it's this repetition of a single visual over and over again within a given area. So pattern is used to give like a visual order to, you know, whatever the design piece is. It can also decorate, and it can help communicate a message. So just like texture, pattern is very powerful in that they are very, very interesting to look at, and the eye is drawn to them instantly. Pattern especially is something that the human eye is very much drawn to. We find patterns in things on a daily basis, and it's a way for our brains to recognize differences in the environment. So if you pay attention to a pattern and you see something that's different, you know, it's something that's been there since you know, back in our caveman days, when we would want to make sure, okay, everything looks the same in this forest, but look at, there's this scary monster over that we have to run from, whatever it is. So you find patterns often in nature, right? We do it within our own daily lives, and we find it everywhere. And the eye is so drawn to pattern and texture as well that overusing it can distract from your whole composition. So you have to be thoughtful about how it gets used. Super repetitive pattern especially is very easy for the eye to be drawn to. And just like we were talking about like the rhythm of line in our line lecture, if you have a pattern that is very rhythmic and it has like a nice beat to it, the eye will stick with it. If you have a pattern that is really like off key, or you have big splashes of something that pop up every so often, that creates a different dynamic in that pattern. Okay. So for your next assignment, you guys are going to be playing with texture. It's one of the favorite assignments that the students tell me in this class, because you guys get to go out, you get to create your own texture, you get to find texture, and then you're going to create a composition utilizing texture. So I'm going to take you guys there. Okay. So they're just like the other assignments we've been doing. You're going to have 3 parts to this project. You're going to start with collecting texture. And you're going to have to make 2 things called texture quilts. And the texture quilts are simply a square graphic made up of 16 squares where you're placing texture. And you're going to have 2 different quilts. One is all handmade. You can use pens, you can use watercolor, you can use colored pencil, you can do rubbings. The other quilt is all found texture, where you guys can take digital images, photographs, images from the web. You can create your own texture digitally using Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that. And you create another quilt. Then, the third part of this project is you take all of the textures, you don't have to use all of them, but you kind of look at your library of textures that you've done, and you decide to develop a composition. So you're going to go to your sketchbook and you're going to think about some ideas, and maybe you're inspired by your textures. It's something that most people kind of like, as they do this project, they don't really go into it with a distinct idea because they become inspired by what they're seeing and collecting. But then when you have all this stuff, you're going to kind of sketch it out in your sketchbook, and then you're going to create a composition using these textures. So here are some examples. And I'll show you guys how to do this. Oh, it's not working. All right. So quilt number 1. This is a student's handmade textured quilt. So you can see you have like some sort of paint. Almost looks like coffee. You have rubbings, textural rubbings. This looks like a little fence of some sort or mesh. This is change. This is some sort of smear of something, I don't know. Crinkled paper that's been kind of scratched up. This one's been burnt and crinkled. But you can see these are all flat, digitally scanned images. But you can see how there's all this like a feeling and evoked texture just from doing something like scanning crinkled paper. And when you guys look on your machines, it'll be easier to see. And then,
That's just scan.
yeah, those are just scanned. I recommend scanning these for a couple of reasons. You'll get like a cleaner scan versus if you take a picture, you have to make sure the lighting is looking good because you want to give yourself as much surface area as possible that you can use in your texture assignment. You also want to make sure that they are high resolution. One of the number one ways that you can screw up this project is by using low-res images, and it makes it look like crap. And I have had multiple students do it, and it sucks because they're bummed out because they don't realize until they print it. And then we put it up there, and it just like takes away from that aha moment when everything prints lovely, and it becomes a huge mess. So high resolution is totally recommended. Okay, so then these are digital images of texture. They could be scans as well, or they could be photographs. In this case, you can see this houndstooth fabric. They manipulated it 4 different ways to create the variations in the texture. So this one looks, in the upper left-hand corner, way fuzzier, right? And this kind of has a more harsh kind of feel. This might be the back side of the fabric. This looks like rock that's been blown out with a filter in Photoshop. They've created kind of like these interesting things with like, it must be some sort of fabric, and they tweak them in Photoshop. Okay. And then this is their final composition. So one of the things to note in this piece is that nothing is competing in terms of texture on top of one another. You can see what's happening here clearly, and all of the patterns have been scaled in a way that is appropriate to the size of the piece. So sometimes, in this case, this was like that flower pattern. It makes more sense for it to be these kind of like abstract shapes and to be really blown up versus to have a fish coated in little flowers, because that would be almost too distracting. Also, you don't want to compete too much. They picked like a really nice basic background and they placed it. It's like a wood grain, very light, probably manipulated it in Photoshop, which we can talk about today as well, to kind of reduce the opacity, or they placed it and they reduced the opacity of the scan or the picture of whatever it is, so that it's not competing with the subject. Same thing with this water that's done in this crinkled paper. It's light in color. The fish are bright, so they pop out because that's the main focus. If you pick something that's too crazy, 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 and you layer more crazy, crazy, the eye doesn't know where to look. And as we just discussed, pattern and texture, the eye is really drawn to it. So this is going to be about knowing how to utilize those textures. The full piece, I would like it to be, you know, as much texture as you can, not so much solids. And so the way to do it is to try to find this balance where you're using the right size for the texture so it creates areas of color that don't compete. All right, so let me show you guys another one. Are you guys getting excited? Does it look fun? Are you worried? So that was probably done in Illustrator. And then this one was created in Photoshop. So this student likes to do a lot of hand drawing. And then the way he did it is he started to layer in actual textures in Photoshop and kind of fill in the background of his illustration in Photoshop. So you see there's various ways you guys can tackle this. So he went in then and he used the brush tool, and he kind of maybe used some of the clone stamp tool, and he threw a little bit of extra like shadow and texture and things. So it doesn't have to be completely like one-dimensional like the fishbowl. You guys can get really clever with it. I really want to look at that one. It's not gonna let me. All right, creating the texture. Let me zoom out. This might take a little bit to load. So these are the hand created ones, and then these are the digital ones. It's just taking a while to load. But you can see close-ups of beans and strawberries and shredded cheese, I think. You know, like in weird places you can find interesting texture. And you may not think about it, but maybe like the shredded cheese, you don't use it for anything that has to do with cheese, but maybe you might be using it for like the texture in the center of a flower, or it's like the hair on a character that you've created. So you can be really, really creative with how you use them. Okay, so let's zoom out. This student did a Photoshop style piece, and it's very like abstract, right? It's not like a particular subject necessarily or a scene. So if you guys want to do something like that, you're definitely welcome to. But the idea is that there's an overall direction that the piece is going. So this kind of all has a vintage feel. The imagery is all relatively in the same visual direction. So you can see you have like these kind of stroked outlines around everything, and everything kind of works together in a way that is not competing or distracting. But this is a really good example of creating kind of like a retro vintage feel with texture in the background. So all of that you guys can click through and check out on the page. There are some exercises here to like kind of help you with creating your texture quilts. Okay. These are really important, your texture quilts. This is like a part of your grade to make sure that you have these. As always, you have to accumulate all of your images and your sketches and brainstorm ideas for your composition. But I'm not interested in saying like seeing 10 thumbnail sketches. I still want you guys to sketch, but I'm not going to give you like a defined number because I really want you guys to focus on finding and creating really interesting textures. And because you have this chance, you can create some really fun stuff. How many of you guys paint or have watercolor or draw, have any sort of stuff? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So bust all that out. Take like a little, you know, Wednesday night and create like a nice little sanctuary and just paint and kind of relax. Okay. So this is, let's see. Talks about the textures, why you want to do it, and then this tells you here how to place all 32 images as a quilt in InDesign. Okay, so you're going to create a document that is 12 inches by 12 inches square, and then you create a 3-inch by 3-inch square with the rectangle tool, and you place it across, and then you can duplicate, and then you can place right into each one of those. Okay, so you guys can watch that video. Let's see. Oh, this is the other thing. I'd like you to, it's not necessary, but if you label or tell me what your textures are in your document, it makes it really fun and interesting for me. It's not required, but I like it. So here's some example of how you can change the different photographs and create interesting texture. Oh yeah, paint on cheesecloth. That's always cool. All right, so you guys can look at that too. So let's talk about how we can place the texture after you've had it collected, and then how you can also do it in Photoshop. How many of you are going to play around in Photoshop for this assignment? Or thinking about it?
I'm gonna try it.
Okay. All right. Well, you can make the decision. Okay. Let's start with this. No, we want this. Is this open? Okay. All right, so we already know how to place a document. So you're gonna have your textures as high-res files scanned. And in Illustrator, you can just create a path and then fill it in by creating a clipping mask like we did. If you wanted to work in InDesign, you guys could place the image right in there. So remember when we did like the word and we clipped and we put an image right into it? Same deal. So let's see. I'm going to use the pencil tool. And what are we doing today? What's our subject? I know, but like what am I gonna draw? Sharks. Okay, let's see if I can draw with this mouse. It's like getting stuck. Do any of you guys have a Wacom tablet? Oh yeah, that's good. Sorry, little shark. Boom. Thank you. Okay, so now let's find a good shark texture. Resolution. Okay, I'm going to save this image. Go back to Illustrator. I'm going to place the image. God, that's a good looking shark. All right, so I'm going to come here. No. This little bar in my filming thing is just like messing up my whole day up right now. No? Okay. So what I want to make sure we do is that you can embed this image into the picture, okay? Then you have them stacked on one another. You want to select both. You can see the bounding box or the vector outline of the shark. Right click, make clipping mask. Oops. Right click, make clipping mask. There we go. Step 1, shark. It's maybe not exactly the texture I want though, right? So, oops. Let's see. Maybe I want more of this kind of like, where's my shark now? Here we go. More of this kind of glossy water down here instead. Make this a little bit bigger. All right. So see, now the shark doesn't become so competitive with everything else on the page. So that seems simple? Are you guys confident in your ability to clip and mask? Okay. Just to warn you, like you're gonna have a lot of images and stuff happening, so it might make your system a little slow. So try to close down as much as you can. Don't have too many programs opening because it might slow down. it's always helpful too if you guys have a sketch and you can actually scan your sketch in and then work from there in terms of tracing all your different vectors for placing it. All right, so now let's talk about Photoshop. Who here has never used Photoshop?
Just
Tiny bit? Okay. So let's find something. See if I have a sketch. So there are a gazillion ways to add texture into Photoshop, and I'm just going to show you the ways that I like to do it because for me it's easy and you don't have to worry about pen tool or any of that. So let's take this heart thing. I'm trying to find a sketch that we can work with. Oh no, that's terrible. Let's take this exploding head. Okay, now I have my sketch. This is like the subject that I want to do. And then I want to make sure that I have some textures open. So I'm going to open one of these texture quilts. And then, just like I did with InDesign and I showed you guys, I want to go and set up my workspace to be 2 up vertical so they're side by side. Now, this is how I like to do it, and you guys can kind of do whatever you're more comfortable with. But in Photoshop, it's different than Illustrator because you're working with pixels. So once you have changed the pixels, you're limited in like how many times you can undo it. I mean, essentially you can always undo it, but if you save it, you can't apply a different attribute to it, okay? So I want to make my little guy yellow. So what I like to do is actually sample pixels from one side, and I'm using here this marquee selection tool, and I'm going to make sure I can actually pull it off by unlocking this background. You can see the layers. Whatever I'm clicked on, that's what's in the layers panel. If I click on this face, you can see all the different layers of the animated GIF, which is so funny. Okay, so you can double click and unlock it. You can also click once and use this lock tool. All right, so I've used the marquee tool. Any of these different selection tools right here, these 3, lasso tools and the magnetic wands, they select pixels in an area. And then you can do certain things with them, like move them around. Okay? So I've selected using the marquee tool, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to click and drag over here. And you can see what I selected, that size, is like exactly what I just cut from there. So, no. See if I can. I'm right clicking and I am going to right clicking. I'm going to flatten this image for a second because I have so many layers on this example. So then this makes it easier for me to work with and show you guys. All right, so back here, you can see that that marquee doesn't go away unless I were to click off of it in that document. So bring this back over. So now you can see I automatically have 2 layers. I have the face, and then I have this texture that is under it. So there's a couple of things you can do. I would rearrange the texture, and then I would play around with how the layers talk to each other, and it's called layer styles. And in these layer styles, you can have that layers on top and the layer on bottom, they kind of have an interesting communication. So if you choose multiply, the 2 kind of add up together, okay? But if you choose a layer style like darker color, just different things happen, and you guys can play around with it. I like multiply because it doesn't change the top line drawing very much. If you're working with line drawings, it makes it a little bit darker, but then you can easily see through. So anything that's white kind of disappears and it becomes kind of see-through, okay? Then what you can do is you can manipulate this yellow layer however you want. So it's kind of, it's not filling it up all the way, so maybe I want to enlarge it. So in Photoshop, the command for making something larger is Command T. This is the transform tool. You can also go edit transform, but you want to hold down shift and drag it and you can make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to click off of it. Hi guys, welcome.
Hey.
Okay, so then you got, instead of like in Illustrator where you can manipulate the stroke or the color and make things see-through, you can use an eraser tool and actually erase pixels in this case. But once you erase the pixels, they're gone. So you can come in here and you can actually kind of erase areas that you don't want your texture to be showing. Okay? So then the other thing that you guys can play with is the clone stamp tool, which is kind of fun. What the clone stamp tool does is it selects pixels from one place and will clone and kind of stamp the texture in elsewhere. So let me see if I can do it on these two different documents. So I have my clone stamp tool. I'm on my textures page. I'm going to increase my selection size a little bit by using the brackets on the keyboard. Right bracket's bigger, left bracket's smaller. And I'm going to hold down Alt and click to select those pixels. So now you can see how I move my cursor and you can see how it's filled with green. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
What it's doing is it's only selecting pixels from that area that I just selected, right in there. So let's see if I can do it over here. I may have to do it on another layer. Probably. Oh no, look, it's working. Okay, so I can select from one document and clone stamp on the other. But you can see I just did it on this layer. So maybe what I want to do is create a new layer first and then paint these pixels. You can also go back and you can select, holding down the Alt key or Option and click. Come back over to your face and then you can fill it in like that. So that's another way that you guys can place textures. So that's more if you wanted to do more of like a kind of an illustrative look. If you want more of that flat look, Illustrator is the way to do it. We're talking about our texture assignment that you guys are going to get today. And so I've been recording all of this so you guys can go back. What?
Start at 5:30.
5. Yeah.
We'll come back to that.
Okay, so questions about texture. So we're going to do quilts to start, the 2 different texture quilts. Handmade textures. And then the digital collected textures, right? Photographs and things you find online. If you want to create texture in Photoshop, you can. Some of the things that you may want to play around with are your filters. Stylize is kind of one that will do some cool stuff. You can play around with that. You can take an image and manipulate it that way. Let's see, where's my filter gallery? Oh yeah, filter gallery. And then you can see different options in here too. Colored pencil, cutout. So that's a way to continue to play around. In Photoshop, you can also manipulate the like color and saturation. So here you have your adjustments panel, and this will allow you to do different things. I'm going to pull this up in a little bit. So let's go to hue and saturation. You can play with how saturated, how bright your colors are, or how desaturated, almost getting black and white. You can manipulate the hue. Let me pull this up a little bit. This has so many different colors in it right now, so but you can see how they're shifting, right? You can manipulate the curves. This is kind of like the exposure levels, but basically you can manipulate contrast. You can do stuff with brightness, contrast this way. So there's a lot of ways that you guys can create your own textures for the digital quilt. What else do I want to show you? I think that's it for now. But make sure you guys look at the entire assignment. Look at the different examples. So this person was definitely inspired by natural landscape posters. So you guys can do stuff like trace a sketch in these programs. It's kind of helpful. But see how the student decided to break it out into areas of color and contrast that made it really easy, so then they could fill in specific areas. Showing me their color palette. These are their textures. And actually, this student did this thing where you can do like little post-it notes in Adobe Acrobat. Oh, it's supposed to anyway. Where you can click on them in theory, and then it would tell you what the textures are. I don't know why it won't. Okay, so these are all the hand-done ones. And then here are the digital textures. Like these feathers are so cool, these layered leaves. I doubt this student took all these pictures, probably found most of them online. Make sure they're high res. Things like this, like rice, you know, like in the bins in the grocery store, like that could be really, really cool stuff. Like you could do that as dirt or mountains or whatever. So they did it all in Illustrator. And then the student went in and filled in with flat color first. And then started to bring in the different textures. So see how rich that gets with all those textures in there? Layered underneath the color. So let me show you how you can do that too. So maybe I want to fill this. Let's see if I can do it. This is a shark, by the way. Okay, so I filled in the shark here with yellow. Maybe. Let's see. I don't think I can do it in here. Go to Window, Transparency, and you can play with the opacity of your shark, like that. So when you're layering it on top of certain things, you kind of can create really interesting, subtle textures that way. Okay. Now it looks like a scary shark. All right. Any more questions about that? You can also reduce your opacity in InDesign. So if you have an object that's placed, this little guy up here reduces the opacity. Okay. You technically could do this all in InDesign as well if you felt like it. Just limitations in like the stroke or the color panel options, swatches options, and like the different kinds of brush strokes and stuff. Because you guys don't all have to use just these textures that you find. You can also create some in the program. So here's your paintbrush tool. And let's open up my brushes window. And there's all kinds of different textures and brushes that come with Illustrator already set up, but you can find free ones online. You can actually make your own, which might be something that we'll do in this class, because for your midterm, each of you is going to pick a different thing to teach the class. So if it's something that you've been wanting to do, if you want to figure out how to do, make your own brushes, you guys can, that's something you can do. So I'm going to choose this Bristol Brush Library. And I'm just going to pick one of these guys. And I'm going to change the color that I have loaded in my brush. All right. And you can see this bristle brush creates interesting texture, right? And there's all these different options you can do. So you can have lots of fun with it. If any of you guys have a Wacom tablet or you go into the DAC lab, they have these big Wacom monitors, and it actually looks like a computer, and you can take a stylus and you can draw right on the screen. They're really fun. So you just have to, whoever's working in there, you have to tell them you want to check out a stylus. But that's a fun way to create more texture. Same thing in Photoshop. The difference between Illustrator's brushes and Photoshop's brushes is that the ones in Illustrator are vector-based graphics, right? So it's just an attribute that's applying to a vector, whereas the Photoshop, it's actual pixels. But same thing, brush tool, you can open up your brush palette and you can select from a wide range of stuff. They also have the bristle brushes, or you can do a more standard style. You can even do stuff that has it's like a little symbol or something. You could reduce the and increase the spacing, right? In Photoshop, you can let's see what this one does. That's a brush one. Usually, there's standards up here that you can kind of pull from. So in some of the brushes, you can reduce how hard the edges of your brush are. So here's a really softed brush. Gives more of like a, you know, like a kind of airbrushed feel. And then something else you can do is you can reduce the opacity to a certain extent in Photoshop, and you can kind of create layers of color and texture that way. So if you want to color something in on top of your texture that you have going, and maybe you just want a hint of color happening, you can come in and subtly kind of color things in, right? Like that. Or whatever. Why isn't that blue? A big blue. There we go. Okay, so those are a gazillion ways to create texture. Who is overwhelmed? Everybody? Uh-huh. So pick a game plan. Pick a software that you want to work in. If you want to play around in Photoshop, you can do so for this assignment. If you want to do Illustrator, but they both will create a different effect. If you're more comfortable in one, maybe try another software for this. You know, it's really up to you. But we haven't really played with Photoshop yet in this class, so I'm not going to force you to do it in Photoshop. But it just creates, like, the whole thing with texture is it can just take something that is so, like, meh, and really make it pop. Okay. Okay, so that's that. Exercise. You guys have another exercise. It's very simple. And you guys are going to be like, why didn't you show me how to do this for the last assignment? But I used to do this exercise before digital painting, and then everyone used Live Trace or Image Trace, and I hated it. Because I hate it. I hate Image Trace. It provides a nice tool, like that you can manipulate, but what happens is if it's one of the first things students see, they like hang on to it for dear, dear life, and they're like, they don't want to do anything else. So you're going to watch a 5-minute exercise, and you're going to take this picture that you can download, or you can download your own picture, it's up to you. And you are going to live trace it or image trace it. And what it does is Illustrator will automatically look at the picture, and based upon a set of criteria that you give it, it will turn it into vectors. So let's do something. The more complicated an image is, the more complicated the vectors become. Also depending on the different parameters that you have. So let's see. Oops. here's some Ray-Bans, and I'm going to image trace them. And you can come into this like this top level navigation when you've placed something, and you can do something right from there. Or you can go object, image trace. Wait, hold on. No, there's a new panel now in CC. Image trace. So in the window, image trace, select preview so you can see what you're doing. And see, it automatically simplified this because I have it set to a default preset of black and white. But if I do color, see what it does? It automatically traces it. Now it's all vectors. You can limit your palette. So right now it's doing 30 colors. If I take it down to 9, things get more simple. And take it to 4, even more simple. What happens is it's really obvious when something is image traced. So it automatically has a look that it's been done. That's part of why I don't like it, because I feel like you are then stuck with what you've been given by the program to a certain extent. So I've traced this with a lot of different colors, and if you look closely, like, it's not smooth and perfect. You can see all these kind of jagged lines. So let me show you what it looks like when I expand it, and you see every single one of these different shapes is a different vector shape. So recoloring things becomes a huge pain in the ass because you have to go in there and highlight different things and kind of figure out how things are broken up. You know, like look at each one of these pieces. And now you guys have the tools where you can use the pen tool and you can trace an image like the lemons and the koi, and you know how to go in and trace something if you wanted it. And then you have to use your visual eye to figure out how you want to do the shading and stuff. It's not to say that this is never used. It's just, like, what is even that I just pulled off of there? That's like nothing. You have to be careful too when you start to delete stuff. Like, it becomes a pain. So let me undo. If you live trace something to be more simplistic, and you do something like black and white, then you have more flexibility, right? Now you have things broken up much more manageable way. So now if you wanted to come in, but even see, look at those lenses. I wanted those lenses out. I have some weird outline here. So you just kind of have to play around and see how everything is. And then, let's see, I'm going to take my blob brush tool here. I'm going to get some red. Now I can come in and kind of create my own vector shape to fill in the lens. And I can select it and arrange it and send it to the back, and now I can color it in however I want. Okay, so let's go back to this exercise. So in this exercise, you guys are going to select the image. You're going to use image trace. Play around with the different tracing options. You can choose whatever you want. Whenever you're happy with it, you can recolor it however you want, and then you're going to turn it in. So, a couple of things too. If you get really fancy and you do like a vector with a gazillion different colors, something that makes it helpful to color things in is to use this select same fill color. And everything in your document that is that same fill color, it will automatically select. So if I wanted to change everything that was black to pink, now I can. Okay? More questions about that? All right, cool. So there's a lot of different ways to create texture.
How do you get the pencil tool? I don't see it.
The pencil tool?
Yeah.
In which program? Illustrator? Photoshop. There actually is no pencil tool in Photoshop, essentially. What it does is pencil uses, it's like a vector. It's just like the pen tool, but it doesn't it's like more free flowing. So if you wanted to use something where you wanted to draw, I would use the brush tool, and I would make sure that you're selecting a brush that is
Oh, I see.
the little brush guy. Make sure you're selecting a brush that is suiting whatever it is that you're trying to do. If you choose a really hard edge brush, let's see, I'm gonna use this. You know, you can start to create something that is more pencil-like. If you really want to create the text, the like, illusion of a pencil, you could do something that has more texture in your brush.
Mine does have a pencil tool. Though.
In your Photoshop?
Yeah.
And is it drawing like a vector line, or is it drawing like a...
It's just drawing like a pencil.
Oh, okay, cool. I don't know why I don't have that. Maybe I do. Okay, here we go. Oh, look it. Okay, cool. There you go. In Illustrator, the pencil tool does a vector line. Let's see if InDesign has it. Same thing with InDesign. Okay. Okay. So now, let's see. Guest speakers coming at 7. You guys can work until then. We can do the Real to Abstract in class. Did anybody not come with any sort of magazines to work with? Just forget. Do you have some? No, you don't? Okay.
I brought some.
You brought some. Would you be willing to share with the class
Yeah.
at all?
Yeah, of course.
I totally forgot to bring you guys a magazine. Because I have a whole stack. But they're all like Martha Stewart, which you use down here. Okay, so if anybody wants to go run around on campus and try to find any sort of printed publication you can, I'm going to go look for some magazines in the DAC lab, see if we have any. But Real to Abstract, we're working on that. You can work on your sketches. You can work on your exercises. Oh, you know what we need to do? We need to do our critique. Just kidding. How many people brought in their printed final digital
I
painting?
just had to print it.
Okay. Tack it up on the board if you brought it. Anderson, you can print it from right here. Okay. Let's do that before Kier gets here.